Got it. All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. I know that the beginning of the school year is crazy time, so I appreciate that you got yourselves here. Real quick, just in case there's anyone here that doesn't know Private Prep very well, we are an education services company that does most of the things, subject tutoring, college admissions coaching, executive functioning, test prep. And so we're happy to support you in any way that we can. Tonight, of course, our focus is on the transition to middle school. And I just want to take a moment and acknowledge the huge change that you all and your children are experiencing. I think part of that is to remind ourselves that the children are just as nervous as you are. They might hide it or mask it, but there's a lot that's new in middle school. They go from being the big fish in their elementary school to the smaller fish. They know that the expectations are larger. Teachers will often say that explicitly. Many of them are in new buildings where they're worried that they won't find their classrooms. Hopefully that's all settled at this point. Some of them are starting to manage lockers for the first time, which is a whole new something to negotiate. And then I think for a lot of kids, the biggest change at the start of middle school is that they're dealing with multiple teachers, parents within this setting. Your job is to guide them by asking a lot of questions, right? You want to start to develop independence and teach them self-advocacy skills and resist the urge when you can to solve all their problems and rather lead them to solving them on their own. They will be proud of themselves. As I talk throughout the evening, I'll sort of point out types of questions that you might ask to do that. And the other thing that I want to just make sure you remember is that schools know that kids are transitioning to a new building or to the middle school, and they know exactly what the changes are from the elementary schools to the middle schools. And so they have some scaffolding in place, right? And they are ready to offer their support. So you can have a little bit of confidence or a great deal of confidence that they're making an effort on that front and that you really are a team. Beautiful. So I mentioned multiple teachers. I think this is the one that feels the biggest as far as changes for a lot of kids, and it's going to impact them in several significant areas. Physical organization, right? Both in terms of what I mentioned as far as lockers potentially needing to go, get what they need, move to someplace else, or just having lots of folders instead of one or two, not having everyone coordinated on a single system, but potentially having different teachers that want slightly different systems. That's going to carry over into how the classrooms function, from what do you do when you first walk in or when the teacher first arrives, to how do you expect homework to be assigned and turned in. So there's a lot for kids to learn within that space. Task tracking, I just alluded to with how do we pick up the worksheets when we come in, right? There's going to be sometimes a consistent approach to use Google Classroom, that was hard to say, or Pupil Path. Sometimes it's going to be inconsistent. And then the thing I like to really bring up within this space is that even though it's true that teachers are all going to have different ways that they're asking kids to do things, self-advocacy is really important. If your child knows that there's a way that they organize their space or write something out that works the best for them, you really want to encourage them to begin to have relationships with those teachers and to ask for those things. In the vast majority of cases, teachers have the systems that they're requesting or request the systems they do because they want the kids to be organized and because they want to support them. But if a kid comes and says, hey, I know what works for me, or I'm doing this unified system, almost all teachers will defer to that, provided that they see that it largely works for the student. Beautiful. So a little bit more on self-advocacy, right? I just talked about the systems, right? The teacher that says, I want a folder or I want a binder. We're going to talk about physical organization within school firm in a minute. And I think if any of the things I talk about there really resonate with you, if physical organization is a challenge for your child, it's going to be really great to help them have that conversation with their teachers. And that's a place where you can offer a great deal of support. either by kind of role playing those conversations, or just asking them, hey, what do you think you would say to your teacher if you wanted them to understand why this is important to you? The other piece in terms of self-advocacy here is in note-taking, right? This is new for a lot of middle schoolers. In elementary school, there's not a lot of note-taking. Hopefully what's going to happen is that teachers are going to be pretty explicit about what they want students to take down. If they're not, one of the things I really like to encourage students to do is to try to just write down the top 3 ideas from any lesson, and take that to their teachers at the end of the week, right? So 5 times 3, they're going to have 15 points that they think are important, and just check in and say like, hey, here's what I'm getting out of this class. Do you agree that I'm on the right track and I'm paying attention to the right things? And again, that's a great way to develop that rapport with the teacher and for everybody to feel comfortable that your child's paying attention to what they ought to. Right. And then tests, we're going to talk a lot about how to prepare for tests. But one of the things that I always tell my students is that anytime you're studying for a test or preparing for a test, you want to make some kind of tool, whether that's a Quizlet deck or a set of flashcards. I feel like that's the default for a lot of kids, or a mind map or whatever it is. Again, we'll talk a lot about that. You want to create something, again, that you can bring to your teacher for feedback. So help your kids find as many ways to self-advocate and to check their understanding by interacting with their teachers as is possible. Beautiful. All right. Moving on now to physical organization at school. This is a big challenge. My top recommendation, if you're a what should we have to organize all these papers and all of these classes, when in doubt, an accordion folder is awesome. I like an accordion folder because, one, it's much easier to use than a binder. Binders are tricky. The rings almost always get misaligned at some point in the school year. Not everything a teacher hands out is going to be hole punched. And so it gets challenging to put everything in there. For a kid who struggles with physical organization, binders are an absolute no-no. Folders aren't terrible, right? Except that you have to keep track of which one you need at any given time. And a lot of students don't yet have the capacity to manage that well in the quick time they have between classes. And accordion folders and all-in-one. They typically come in like 5, 8, 13 pockets. You want to make sure that your children label them, all those pockets. A couple things that they might include as accordion folder labels that don't immediately come to mind. If they're starting to explore clubs or extracurriculars, you might make a tab for that. Homeroom or advisory sometimes needs a tab, and that's because that's where students are getting notes for parents to sign or announcements and things of that sort. Pardon me, that was hard to say. I also really like a to-do folder. If you've got kids that tend to lose track of the homework assignments, sticking them all in one space so that that folder should be empty, but at the end of the day, after they do all of their homework, can be really helpful. And then likewise, a to turn in folder. And that one should be empty by the end of the school day, right? So you do it, you take it out of the to-do folder when you get home, you do it, move it over to the turn in folder and pass them out, return those in throughout the day. Another thing that can be really helpful for students, I know even if we can get through the school day, getting everything that they need home can start to be a challenge. And so if you're able to have an end of the day alarm that just sort of says like, make sure you've got everything. Better yet, if it's got an actual list of what those things are. But I know, some students have STEAM classes or science classes or math classes or English classes, all the classes where there's materials that need to come home only on occasion. And so you want them to just take a moment and really think about what those materials are before they close up for the day. If that's a real thing that goes on with frequency for your students and you're worried that they're going to forget to bring the stuff home, it can be really helpful to have a section of their homework book that has that where they write in things that they need to take home. So as those come up during the day, you know, bring home your English novel, bring home science book to answer the questions. They're writing that in a particular spot in their homework book, and then they've got something concrete to check when that end of the day alarm goes off. Finally, maybe obviously, or maybe not, also a pencil case. Whether kids have a locker, or they're just walking around with a full backpack all day, having an organized pencil case is extremely helpful for being able to find the things that you need throughout the day. If it's a pencil case that stays in the backpack, that can be one that you review with them occasionally at home, or that's just part of a to-do list for them at home to sort of once a week reorganize that pencil case. And it can be really helpful and streamline things so that they're not kind of in math without a calculator or anywhere without a sharpened pencil. And then I don't want to be remiss and totally leave out organization at home. We learned, I think all of us through the pandemic, how important creating a good study space is. And while we're not, thankfully, all studying from home all the time anymore, homework is still happening at home, and it remains really important to create a good space to do the work. So one, just identify that space and try to help your child keep that consistent. Have a conversation with them about where's the best place for you to do your homework. For some kids, it's going to be in their room, away from the distractions of a bustling apartment or a bustling house. For some kids, their room is a terrible place because that's where all their cool stuff is, and no one's going to notice when they're on, you know, Snapchat or whatever, instead of doing their homework. And those kids should probably be like at the kitchen table. So think about what that is, and then really create the space and separate it from where they do anything else, right? This is another reason we don't want to do our homework in bed, partially because we want there to be a space where the child's psychology says, cool, I'm sitting here, it's time to work. One of the ways to create that space is to create a print-rich environment. And that means have things at the space that support the child in doing their work. If you don't have the room to put a lot up on the wall, you can go ahead and get one of those trifolds from like old school science fairs. They still use them, and put the print rich things I'm about to talk about there. And the kids can kind of put that up around their workspace while they're working, and then it can get folded up and put away when they're not. But think of things like those things that are in the classroom, right? English teachers tend to have transition words to ease writing. Math teachers will have up important formulas or important shapes with their rules kind of around them. There might be the list of the steps of the scientific method or whatever the things are. If there's a place where your child often gets stuck, that's something that you want to put a visual, something text rich up around them so that they have a way to get unstuck. You can always reach out actually directly to your child's teachers. Better yet, encourage them to do it for copies of whatever it is the teachers have up in their classrooms, because I promise you the teachers have something up and they're able to give you a little bit of direction about the kinds of supports that are going to be most helpful to the work. Oh, another one that I forgot to say that I really like, for kids who struggle with motivation, a bit of a vision board can be really helpful. Why am I doing this? In fact, when I sit down. Other things to consider for the space, environmental supports. When I say that, I mean things like timers. I love a timer for everything. If a kid estimates how long it's going to take to do a task, set a timer, see if you're correct. This is going to help us develop awareness of time. If you're taking a break, dedicate 10 minutes to that, have the timer go off so you don't accidentally spend an hour on social media when you meant to spend 10 minutes. I also, as far as environmental supports, you know, again, if you've got that pencil case I talked about a minute ago, great. Otherwise, a caddy with school supplies. If a student doesn't have a dedicated desk, the caddy's awesome because it's really easy to move if for some reason something's going on and they can't work in the space that's ideally their workspace. And then all of this requires some sort of maintenance plan. You and I all know from our own attempts at maintaining physical organization that we can set up a great system, and most of us are going to have it slowly drift into chaos, different rates, but it's going to happen, right? And so you want to talk with your child about like, great, how often are we going to clean out your accordion folder? How often are we going to go ahead and straighten up this workspace or swap out the print rich things that are here? Ask the kinds of questions that are going to lead your child to think about, what does it mean to maintain my organization over time? If you get them to answer that, you can take note of that and talk about also like, hey, would it be okay if I check in with you every week and make sure that you're on top of that? We can kind of check together about how to edit any of these systems, right? Because the other thing that's really important about the idea of a maintenance plan is that it's also an opportunity to reflect on what's working and what's not and adjust. And setting that expectation up front does two beautiful things. One, it teaches your child that nothing is perfect the first time, right? And that part of being a good student and being a successful human is being willing to try something new, to try it again, to be a little resilient when it doesn't work. And two, it helps us as parents maintain the patience of this is a work in progress. We are all aware that it's not going to be perfect from the get-go. And then the other piece of organization that I think is really important that we often don't talk about is actually organizing information. That's also part of executive functioning and really important for success in school, obviously. So a couple, pardon me, definite things to sort of just teach kids, because again, not all schools and not all teachers will explicitly teach note-taking, but it's something that they're going to end up doing. They always want to have a heading. Ideally, that includes the date. If they don't feel like they know what heading to put on at the start of a class, it's okay to just leave space, take their notes, and at the end of the day, go back and say, now that I took these notes, I know what the right heading is. It's also okay to take the notes and not know and ask the teacher, hey, what would you say was the main topic today? I'd like to head my notes. The point of notes, right? One, if we're writing it down, we're probably a little more engaged in the material as it's being delivered to us. We are then more likely to retain that information because we're engaged with it. Two, we're creating the sources that are going to drive our studying. You might say, well, at some point, the teachers give a copy of class notes. Beautiful, wonderful. You know, if that's the case, if your child gets a copy of class notes, I highly recommend annotating those class notes, because the class notes, you know, might not have every detail that they needed. There might be a particular example that a teacher gives that you might say, hey, you can write that down. You might even just annotate the notes by starring the things on there that the teacher talks about the most. But for kids to think about, you know, what do these notes provide me and what else do I need in order for the notes to be a good study tool for me? I talked at the top about checking in. If you're taking notes, you want to check in with yourself. Hey, do these notes make sense to me when I come home after a day of school and I reread them? If they don't make sense, I better ask some clarifying questions. If they don't make sense because the ideas were confusing, maybe I can ask my parents, maybe I can look it up on YouTube. Here again is an opportunity for you as parents to ask prompting questions about how kids can clarify that information. Maybe they have a friend who's really good at it and they want to get together and study together. But really asking about, does all of this make sense to you? Can you prove it to me? And again, I talked about the top 3 early in the presentation, but that's a really accessible way for a lot of kids to take notes. I'll acknowledge here that the visual I have up is of Cornell notes. Those are wonderful. I'm going to explain them really quickly because they can be a little lofty for some middle school students. But the idea here is that that big section that you see kind of on the top right is going to be where the kids are just writing down whatever the teacher tells them to write or whatever stands out to them during class. Then sometime after class, they're going to go over in that left-hand column and pull out main ideas or questions that they think might come up on a test. I tell kids, if they're doing Cornell notes, to do that the day that they took the notes, to go in and do the cues column on the left. And then I tell all my kids at the end of the week to go through and do that bottom section where they write a summary sentence or two for every day that happened. And doing that is a really great way to do ongoing studying for long-term retention. All right. and we continue. I hit the button. I just want to, there's been a couple places here where I've talked about lists. I talk about students making lists of materials that need to go home, right? I talked about kind of the implicit lists in the accordion folders. I have lots of students have a school, sit down and do your homework list in terms of, all right, I'm going to take this out. This is the time I'm going to start. These are the places I need to check to make sure I know everything that I'm going to do, right? I'm going to do the things. Then I'm going to go back and make sure that I did my best work. So there's those kinds of lists. There's morning lists of what needs to go in the backpack, right? But lists are incredibly powerful because of their positive impact on working memory, right? So if you've got kids that are forgetful, they need lists, not only to remember those things that come up very often, but also because our working memory, that is the memory we're using to do whatever's going on in any given moment, right? Like I'm doing this math problem and I'm trying to keep track of what are the variables. I need to write them down. I'm keeping track of the different units. That's our working memory. And if I'm holding in my head all of the homework that I have that day, if that's in my working memory, while I'm doing that math problem, there's less working memory available for me to work well. And so it's extremely important to get in the habit of really externalizing almost anything you can. So ask your kids to write it down. That's the reason they want to do it. Lots of times kids push back, but once I explain to them that the reason to write things down is so that they can make use of their full brain at any given moment, that tends to be pretty motivating because they'll work more efficiently, they'll work better, it'll be good. Okay. The other thing that comes up a great deal and starts to be a little bit more on the kids in middle school is planning. So I don't have a favorite planning system, right? I think, again, if all of the adults that are gathered here this evening were to share our systems, they would all be slightly different, but they work for each of us. And I think that's okay. And I think it's important to give children the space to likewise have something that is unique to them. And so I like to talk about the elements of a planning system because however you do it, we all do these things. So one of the things for kids is to think about chunking and being explicit about what they need to do, right? So I think the classic example is an essay. Many schools in middle school will start to assign essays. And if what's on a student's to-do list is just essay, due next Friday, there's nothing about that that tells me what I need to do. And so it's not explicit enough. It's also so big that kids will have a very difficult time understanding how much work is in there when they need to start, and they might feel overwhelmed for that reason. And so you want to help them break it down into those steps. One of the tips that I give all of my students is anytime you get an assignment or learn about a test that's more than one day away, right? The thing that's not due tomorrow, what you need to do the day it's assigned is sit down and break it into parts. And that's something you can do with your kids and ask them, all right, if the essay is due next Friday, what are all the things you're going to have to do to make that happen? When do you think you need to have a rough draft so that you have time to revise? Is there anyone that should be looking at that essay before you turn in a final draft, right? And there's 1,000 other questions you could ask, but get them in the habit of thinking about it rather than just saying, I know it's due Friday, but obviously you need to have a draft due by Wednesday so that you can show it to your teacher, because prompting them to come to those conclusions on their own, number one, will lead to less fighting about doing the actual thing. Number two, it's teaching them the problem solving and the planning so that eventually they can do it on their own. That was hard to say as well. And number three, it's giving them the confidence that they understand the work that they're doing. Okay, so that idea of chunking and being explicit is overlaid on everything else. We need a monthly view. And for lots of kids I work with, the monthly view is in a different place than the weekly views and the daily views. But the monthly view is where we put anything that is time bound, right? And any major due dates, right? So tests, projects, essays, those due dates go on the monthly view. Doctor's appointments, games that are coming up, performances that are coming up, grandma's birthday, all of that goes on the monthly view, just so that we have an idea of what our responsibilities. You don't need to put something that happens every day on that monthly view, right? It's the things that we might otherwise lose track of need to go there, just so we can notice that when it's getting busy, right? Or if there's a test on Friday and I know I've got a game on Wednesday and grandma's birthday on Thursday, I better start studying a little earlier because I'm not going to have a lot of time in the days right before the test. So we need a monthly view. I'm going to talk in a minute about different tools that I like for the different elements of this. So that's coming if you're worried about that. You need a daily plan. I like to tell kids to do that just as a to-do list, right? So you've got your monthly view, you can kind of look at what's going on. When you got your larger projects, you broke them down into parts. Ideally, you added them to your planner with mini due dates. If not, it's written down somewhere. You can look on any given day and kind of notice what those things are. But also, you actually write down on a to-do list what the homework assignments are. Lots of kids will say to me, oh, well, it's on Google Classroom, it's on Canvas, it's on Schoology, whichever one it's on. Yes, it is. But the thing that happens is this. Most kids, if they don't take the time to write down their daily to-do list, will click through every single one of their classes and kind of get that holistic view of what's going on. But by the time they click through all 5 to 8 classes that give homework, they don't remember what the homework was for math. It was what page? I don't know. Let me go there again. Now I'm doing the math. Then I don't remember what it was for English. And so there's a lot of time that gets lost, again, when we don't write it down. Whereas if we write it down, it's all there. We spend a little bit of time organizing ourselves, being sure there's nothing missing on our list. And now I can physically cross them out when I finish them. That feels good. And when I pack them into my done folder, in my backpack, in my accordion folder, wherever that is, when I physically hit the submit button on the Google Classroom, right? And so that daily plan is extremely important, and it needs to end up in one place when you're executing on it. Otherwise, there tend to be dropped balls. And then the other thing that needs to be in here, similar to the maintenance plan we talked about for physical organization, is some sort of weekly reflection. Oh my goodness, I only have a couple of minutes left. I got to start at 6:34, so I have 3 minutes before I'm over. I'm going to do it. So weekly reflection, right? Again, about what went well this week, what didn't go well, how can I recreate what's going well, how can I adjust to address those things that didn't go as well. Planning tools, beautiful here. So one thing that I really like are whiteboards. Whiteboards tend to work incredibly well for a monthly view. Kids tend to not push back against them terribly hard. Somehow they feel different than a plan.
Planners obviously are good tools. Google Calendar can also serve the purpose of a planner. I like small notebooks. Small notebooks are a great way, like a whiteboard for a monthly view paired with a small notebook for that daily to-do list works really well for a lot of kids who refuse to use a planner. And to-do lists are awesome. If you want a digital option for that, my favorite app is Todoist. It is free and it has loads of functionality. It's super easy to use. You can give sub steps to all kinds of things. Awesome. All right. Guys, the things that's in this study plan and the study methods are going to come to you in email. So it's okay that I'm going to rush through them a little bit. You're going to get a copy of this study template and the materials on the next page. So, oh, hi, Karen.
Are you done?
No. I was going to keep going, but you came back and it made me worry.
I came back because I'm just want to be present for you when you're ready for the Q&A.
You're being ready, but
that's the only reason I'm back.
Beautiful.
Didn't mean
Sorry,
to distract
everybody.
you.
All right, so study plans, guys. A good study plan is going to have at least 4 study sessions for any assessment. They don't need to be long, right? Lots of kids will say, well, I'm going to study for 2 hours the night before. I would much prefer they study for 15 minutes each of 4 nights. And that has to do with our ability to condensed learning while we sleep, and the impact of having multiple exposures to the same information, right? The other thing is we're going to want to mix up our approach. As I said, Quizlet is a default. Quizlet is fine. It shouldn't be 4 study sessions of Quizlet. And again, that comes back to the more ways our brain has to go and find information, the more likely it is to be able to access one of those ways at the moment where we need the information. For our study sessions, we want clear goals. We want to sit down and say, okay, on Monday, I'm going to make my Quizlet deck. On Tuesday, I'm going to review it once. On Wednesday, I'm going to write some practice test problems and have my mom quiz me on them. And on Thursday, I'm going to look at the teacher study guide and try to answer it. I should be good at that point, right? It's less about how much time we spend and more about getting to certain amounts of comprehension. As I mentioned at the top, you want to make at least one tool so that you can include a touch base with your teacher. And finally, study methods, right? I said you want to mix it up. And so you absolutely do. You can do a study guide in phases. Have your child ask for a couple copies of the study guide. Do it once without their notes, then use their notes to go back and fill in. Study whatever they weren't able to do, and then come back later and try again to fill it in without their notes. I mentioned writing a practice test is a great way to study. Songs, poems, mnemonic devices. I'm skipping over ones that people probably know. Making a mind map is a way of visually showing how different ideas are connected. Annotating notes with symbols, going through and starring what's most important, using exclamation points. If there's a theme you're following, coming up with a letter for that. Voice recordings are awesome, and kids can play them back like while they walk to the subway or whatever the things are, to the bus stop. Having someone quiz you activates our auditory learning. Writing ideas on Post-its and organizing them on the wall is a really great way to get moving and feel similar to students to flashcards, but actually the movement makes it activate different areas of our brain. Drawing pictures to illustrate new ideas, also a really great way to study. Beautiful. I'm just about there. I want to also, as far as parents' roles here, I really want to encourage you to celebrate any success as you see it, right? I think it's easy for us to fall into the trap of noticing the things that aren't going well, but it is actually more important to celebrate the things that your students are doing that you want them to continue to repeat, because then they will put their energy there and you will enjoy celebrating them. It's lovely for everyone. I'll leave up my contact information. And if anyone has questions, you can throw them in either the chat or the Q&A. Whew, I went over. I'm sorry. I'm usually real good.
Oh, 3 minutes doesn't count, Jenna. That is how much of a stickler you are on time. That was fantastic. I see a question coming in. It is around how to help our daughters navigate social situations with kids and adults in middle school.
So hard. I remember middle school as brutal. It's a time where a lot of kids, you're right, are learning to navigate all of those different situations. So here I think I come back to my celebrate successes, help your children develop the growth mindset of noticing the things that go well during a day, asking lots of questions when they bring up challenges that they're facing, when they tell you that they're upset about some interaction that happened at school. Try to really understand what that is and ask questions that will allow them to problem solve, because the reality is we can't solve those social situations. And then as far as the adult relationships, I think I'll just go back to all of the instances I talked about regarding self-advocacy. And I'll encourage you to encourage them to start that early in the school year, because I think one of the things with teachers is, right, they're human. And so if they see your kids looking to form that relationship and demonstrate their effort before they're struggling, then they become much more likely to, you know, round a grade up or give a little extra tip when there's an opportunity for that.
Yeah. Having had 3 girls go through middle school, I think that advice is spot on.
I'm not excited.
No. Any other questions?
All right.
Well, you know where to find us if you need anything. Jenna's information is here. And, hope this was helpful to you tonight, and we look forward to being in touch.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great night.